They were the first NFL team to win 3 straight championships. They had one of the greatest coaches of all time. The Green Bay Packers were the gold standard of the NFL. Then Vince Lombardi left and everything fell apart. Over the next 20 years, they had just 4 winning seasons. But before Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers could come and save the franchise, there was one unexpected quarterback who somehow reignited a franchise that had become the joke of the league. What are you saying, guys? It's Zane here. Let's get into it. Over the 20 years since Lombardi left, the Packers had developed a bit of a reputation. If a player needed some motivation, a coach would threaten to trade them to Green Bay. They just couldn't seem to fill the void of Vince Lombardi. These are the records of the coaches that followed. And while there were players that had some flashes over the years, there's one that really stands out. A 10th round pick in the 1987 draft from Virginia, Don Majkowski. Upon arrival in the Bay, Majkowski was already a risk. That's what I'm calling Green Bay, it makes it sound a little fancier. Remember, nobody wanted to play here at this point. In his senior year of college, he separated his shoulder, but the draft was approaching, so he couldn't just go get surgery or spend time rehabbing. Every game was critical, so he played through the pain, and even though Virginia went 3-8, it was enough to get him drafted. He'd spend a couple years establishing himself on the team, learning the playbook, and eventually midway through his second year, he secured the starting role as the quarterback. So that year, in 1988, the Packers went 4-12. It just felt like the same old, and realistically, is a 10th round pick from Buffalo, New York, going to turn a team around that had been in the basement for decades? Here's this guy with his flowing mullet, tight pants and high socks, thinking he can lead this team to its previous glory days.
I look at the quarterback situation, and I can see some of the things I'm sure that they saw in San Francisco early in Joe Montana's career. Don Majkowski could be that type of player.
Well, 1989 would be the breakout year, a season full of close wins and late comebacks. How he played that year would get him the nickname Magic Man. It really started in week 2 of the 1989 season, as the New Orleans Saints came to play Green Bay. Now, despite being down 17 points at halftime, Majkowski came back out and threw 3 touchdowns in a 35-34 victory. That would be one of his 7 game-winning drives and one of 4 games won by a single point. The following week, they were down 38-7 at half, and the Magic Man almost pulled off the impossible. They just fell short, losing 41-38. Game after game was like this. Eventually, with Majkowski at the helm, it felt the Packers always had a chance. Maybe the most memorable moment of the season came in what is now known as the instant replay game. It's November 5th, 1989. The Bears are in Lambeau, but even though it's a home game for the Packers, they haven't beaten the Bears since 1984, 5 years prior. This historic rivalry was turning out to be one-sided. A change was due in Green Bay. At least Green Bay hoped. It came down to 4th and goal at the Bears 14 with 41 seconds left. The Packers were down 13-7. Don Majkowski takes a snap and he rolls to the right. As he steps forward, he throws the ball across his body to Sterling Sharp for a touchdown. But just as they were beginning to celebrate, the line judge threw a flag. Majkowski was allegedly past the line of scrimmage. No change in the Bay today. The Bears had won. Well, after checking the instant replay, it turned out he wasn't past the line of scrimmage. It was now ruled a touchdown, and the Packers kicked the extra point to win 14-13. Now, as satisfying as that victory would have been, it's been 5 years since you beat your rival, the biggest game was yet to come. Fast forward a couple weeks to November 19th. Green Bay were heading to the real Bay to face the 9-1 49ers, led by the eventual MVP of the season, Joe Montana. The same team that would go on to humiliate the Broncos in the Super Bowl probably weren't anticipating what the Packers had in store. One of just 2 losses that entire season came at the hands of the Magic Man. Thanks to a dominant defensive effort that forced 4 49er turnovers, the Packers actually did it. They beat the eventual Super Bowl champions, and they finished that year with a 10-6 record, their best in almost 20 years. That record was enough to clinch a playoff spot, but one more thing had to fall into place. That came down to the final game of the season, as the Vikings hosted the Bengals. 20 years of pain in Green Bay hinged on your rival losing. That would be the ultimate Christmas present. Christmas would come early. Well, for the Vikings. The Vikings won the game. Despite finishing with the same record, they held the tiebreaker, so the Packers missed the playoffs. I'm sure the 49ers were pretty happy about that. It's fine though. Majkowski just led the league in passing yards, attempts, and completions, went to the Pro Bowl, the first Packers quarterback to do so since Bart Starr, and finished second behind Joe Montana in MVP voting. Now, it was a distant second, but still second. The Packers finally had a good quarterback. It couldn't have looked better for the team and Majkowski, with 49ers head coach George Seifert going as far to say, "I think Majkowski is a budding young Montana." Although the season ended on a whimper, despite all those highlight reel finishes, brother, there was hope. Heading into the 1990 season, Majkowski did want a better contract, but this was pre-1993 free agency, so all he could really do was hold out. With no leverage, he had to eventually sign a 1-year deal, which was not the deal he was after. It also meant he wouldn't start till week 3, and when he got back in, he just seemed a bit rusty, but he would quickly get that mojo back. In week 4 against the Lions, trailing 21-10 in the fourth quarter, the Packers looked like they were going to drop to a 1-3 record. But on one of their final drives, Majkowski completed 4 of 5 passes for 44 yards, as well as 15 yards rushing. With just under 4 minutes left, he completed a 4-yard touchdown pass to make it 21-17. Then, with barely a minute left, at the Lions 26, the Packers faced 3rd and 17. But as Majkowski took the snap, the play broke down, so he had to lob it into the back of the end zone. Receiver Jeff Query would come down with it with 55 seconds left, giving the Packers a 24-21 lead. But the Lions managed to drive all the way to the Packers 44. With 3 seconds left, the Packers watched the kick sail wide right. That would be the 4th field goal the Lions missed that game. Unfortunately, that was one of the last highlights of Majkowski's career. In week 10 against the Cardinals, he was body slammed into the ground and would tear his rotator cuff on the play. A flag was thrown, but it was useless at this point. His career was over. He did come back, he played 6 more years, but he was not the same player. 1992 would be the final act for the Packers. After tearing a ligament in his ankle against the Bengals, a guy you might have heard of stepped in, and well, pretty much never stepped out. Brett Favre, paired with the recently hired general manager Ron Wolf and coach Mike Holmgren, proved to be the trio that would finally pull the Packers out of those dark ages. Don Majkowski wasn't Brett Favre or Aaron Rodgers. He had one good season, but he brought a team that had been irrelevant for so long back to being competitive. That one season was significant enough to get him inducted into the Packers Hall of Fame in 2005. Now, Majkowski has suffered a lot since retiring. He's had problems with all types of body parts. He's had over 25 surgeries to alleviate the pain. Some have worked and others have not. Yet he still maintains he would do it all again if he could.